Only one of them could survive. The woman carrying the only rescue rope gave it to the wolf instead. The villagers would spend years arguing about what she should have done. Only later would the entire kingdom realize they were asking the wrong question. Winter had conquered the northern forests. Snow buried the mountain roads beneath thick white silence. The river Varon, usually calm and gentle, had become a frozen ribbon stretching between towering pines. Most travelers refused to cross it. Aurelia Rowan crossed it every week. 24 years old, a healer with wind-burned cheeks and kind gray eyes. She traveled alone through storms that frightened seasoned hunters. Strapped behind her saddle were bundles of herbs, medicine, and clean bandages. Inside the nearest mountain village waited dozens of patients. An elderly man whose fever had returned. A little girl recovering from pneumonia. A pregnant woman expected to give birth before sunrise. Whenever concerned villagers begged her to wait until spring, Aurelia always answered with the same quiet smile. No patient should suffer, because winter arrived first. That morning, the wind felt different, sharper, restless. Her old horse stamped nervously before stepping onto the frozen river. "It's all right, Bramble." She gently stroked his neck. "We'll be across in a few minutes." The ice groaned beneath every hoofbeat. Thin cracks spread like silver spider webs beneath the snow. Halfway across, a terrible roar shattered the silence. Crack! The frozen river split open less than 20 yards ahead. Sheets of ice collapsed into the black water below. Something enormous crashed through the surface. A massive black wolf. Larger than any Aurelia had ever seen. The current seized it instantly. The wolf struggled desperately, its powerful claws scraping uselessly against the broken ice. Each attempt only shattered more of the frozen surface. On the far riverbank, several woodcutters dropped their tools. One shouted at the top of his lungs. "Stay back!" Another pointed frantically. "The ice won't hold both of you." An older woman grabbed Aurelia's sleeve. "It's only a wolf. You have medicine to deliver. If you go closer, you'll die too." Aurelia looked toward the frightened villagers, then back at the struggling animal. The wolf's golden eyes met hers. They weren't wild. They weren't cruel. They were terrified. Without another word, she untied the thick rescue rope from her saddle. It was the only one she carried. Every winter traveler owned one. Sometimes it saved a horse, sometimes a wagon, sometimes a person. She wrapped one end securely around her own waist. The other she coiled carefully in her hands. The villagers shouted louder. "What are you doing? You'll never pull a wolf that size. Leave it. It's too late." Aurelia ignored every voice except her own conscience. She stepped onto the cracking ice. One careful step, then another. The freezing water crept closer with every movement. She swung the rope once, twice, then threw it with all her strength. The coil landed inches from the wolf's muzzle. For one desperate heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the great wolf lunged forward. Its powerful jaws caught the rope. Aurelia smiled. "Good. Hold on." She leaned backward with every ounce of strength she possessed. The villagers rushed forward. Together they pulled. Foot by foot, the enormous wolf slid toward solid ice. Almost there. Almost. The river exploded beneath Aurelia. The ice shattered under her weight. The freezing current swallowed her instantly. Someone screamed. Bramble reared in panic. The villagers reached for the rope. Too late. Aurelia surfaced only once. The current dragged her away beneath floating sheets of ice. She looked toward the wolf she had saved. A faint smile touched her lips. Live, the rope snapped. The black wolf stumbled onto solid ground, just as the river carried Aurelia into the rushing darkness. For a single, endless moment, the great beast stood frozen. Then it lifted its head toward the gray winter sky. A howl unlike anything the villagers had ever heard echoed across the mountains. It wasn't the cry of a predator. It was the cry of someone who had just watched the person who saved his life disappear beneath the ice. The great black wolf never took its eyes off the river. The current had already carried Aurelia beyond sight. Still, it stood on the shattered ice, trembling. Its golden eyes searched the rushing water, as though refusing to believe she was gone. Then the forest erupted with voices. "Your Majesty! He's over here!" Dozens of mounted royal guards burst through the snow-covered pines. Their horses skidded to a halt beside the broken riverbank. Captain Rowan leaped from his saddle. The moment he saw the black wolf alive, relief flooded his face. "Thank the moon goddess. We found him." The wolf staggered toward them. Its strength was nearly gone. The silver arrow protruding from its shoulder glistened with frozen blood. Captain Rowan immediately recognized it. An assassin's weapon. Hours earlier, Alpha King Cassian Draven's hunting party had been ambushed deep inside the northern forest. Poisoned arrows forced him into his wolf form before he escaped into the mountains. The attackers believed the freezing wilderness would finish what they had started. Instead, one unknown healer had intervened. The wolf collapsed. Its body shuddered violently. Then silver light surrounded it. The guards quickly turned away, lowering their eyes. When the light faded, the great wolf was gone. In its place knelt a man. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair soaked with icy water. A deep wound marked his shoulder where the poisoned arrow had pierced him. Alpha King Cassian Draven. His first words were not about the assassination, not about the traitors, not even about his own injuries. The woman. His voice was hoarse. "Find her." Captain Rowan frowned. "What woman?" Cassian grabbed his arm. "The healer. She saved me. The river took her." The captain looked toward the shattered ice. Fresh rope fibers still floated on the water. The snapped end remained tied around a nearby pine. His expression changed instantly. "Search the river." Every soldier moved at once. For 3 days, the search never stopped. Men walked miles of frozen riverbanks, carrying long poles. Divers entered water so cold that several nearly lost their own lives. Hunters searched the surrounding forests in case the current had thrown her ashore. Villagers joined the effort. So did fishermen from neighboring towns. No one asked why the king refused to leave. Every sunrise found Cassian standing beside the river. Every sunset ended the same way, empty-handed. Captain Rowan approached him on the 3rd evening. "Your Majesty, you haven't eaten." Cassian didn't answer. His eyes remained fixed on the dark water. She was smiling. The captain looked confused. When she disappeared, Cassian closed his eyes. She smiled, as though saving me was enough. His voice broke. "I don't even know her name." Late that afternoon, one young soldier shouted from downstream, "Captain!" The search party rushed toward him. Caught beneath the roots of a fallen pine lay a torn piece of blue fabric. Captain Rowan carefully lifted it free. A woman's travel cloak. Its sleeve had been ripped away by the river. Inside one pocket rested a small leather pouch. Medicinal herbs spilled into the snow. Cassian recognized it immediately. She had carried it across the ice. Hope faded from every face. The river had returned only her cloak, nothing more. The royal council officially declared the young healer dead. Memorial prayers were held throughout the northern villages. People spoke quietly about the brave woman who had chosen a wolf's life over her own. Cassian refused to attend the ceremony. Instead, he returned alone to the riverbank after everyone else had gone home. The broken rescue rope still lay where it had snapped. He knelt slowly, picked it up. The rough fibers were stiff with ice. One end still bore the knot she had tied around her waist. He held it carefully, as though it were something priceless. "I don't know who you were," he whispered into the winter wind, "but I swear, your courage will never disappear beneath this river." Far above the frozen valley, Snow began falling once again. And somewhere beyond the mountains, the river continued carrying its greatest secret toward a destiny no one yet imagined. The river carried Aurelia for nearly 20 miles, through broken ice, past frozen cliffs, beneath fallen trees whose branches scraped against the rushing current. No ordinary person should have survived. More than once, her body disappeared beneath the icy water. More than once, the river seemed determined to claim her forever. Then, as dawn broke over the eastern wilderness, the current slowed. Her unconscious body drifted against a shallow bank where thick reeds had trapped fallen branches. It was there that two elderly herbalists found her. Miriam had gone to gather willow bark before sunrise. Instead, she found a young woman lying half-buried in snow. "Elias!" She cried, "Hurry!" Her husband came running. The old man knelt beside the stranger. His fingers searched for a pulse. For several terrifying seconds, he found nothing. Then, the faintest heartbeat. "She's alive." Miriam immediately removed her own wool cloak and wrapped it around the young woman. "We have to move quickly. The cold is winning." Together, they lifted Aurelia onto their small wooden sled. The journey home took nearly 2 hours. Neither of them complained. They had buried their only daughter years earlier. Leaving this young woman behind had never been an option. For 12 days, Aurelia drifted between life and death. The fever came first, then the nightmares. Sometimes she whispered words neither of the old couple could understand. Other times, she reached desperately toward invisible hands before falling back into restless sleep. Miriam never left her bedside. Elias brewed medicines through the night. On the 13th morning, Aurelia finally opened her eyes. The ceiling above her was unfamiliar. Wooden beams, bundles of drying herbs. The scent of pine smoke filled the room. She looked around slowly. "Where?" Her voice cracked. "Am I? Safe." Miriam smiled warmly. "That's all that matters today." Aurelia frowned. "My name?" She stopped. Confusion spread across her face. She searched desperately through her thoughts. Nothing. Her breathing quickened. "I can't remember." Miriam gently took her hand. "Don't force it." "What do you remember?" Aurelia closed her eyes. "Herbs," she answered after several moments. "I know herbs. I know how to treat fever. I know how to set broken bones." She opened her eyes again. "But," she looked frightened, "I don't know who I am." Elias exchanged a quiet glance with his wife. The river had stolen more than memories of the accident. It had taken the young woman's past. Weeks became months. Slowly, Aurelia regained her strength, but her memories never returned. One afternoon, Miriam smiled as they harvested lavender together. "We can't keep calling you young lady." Aurelia laughed softly. "I suppose not. What shall we call you?" She looked toward the river sparkling in the distance. "I don't know." Elias thought for a moment. "Our daughter was named Helena." Miriam nodded sadly. "We've always loved the name Lena." She smiled at the young woman. "Would that be all right?" Aurelia repeated it quietly. "Lena." Somehow, it felt gentle, safe. "I like it." From that day forward, everyone in the surrounding villages knew her as Lena. Years passed peacefully. The tiny cabin gradually became a woodland clinic. Travelers stopped for medicine. Hunters sought treatment for broken limbs. Children arrived with scraped knees and winter coughs. Lena never turned anyone away. She charged only those who could afford to pay. Everyone else received help freely. One spring morning, a frightened little girl appeared outside the clinic, carrying an injured fox wrapped inside her coat. "Please," she whispered, "can you save him?" Lena smiled. "Let's try." The little girl returned every day afterward. Her name was Willow. She had lost both parents during a mountain landslide the previous winter. Eventually, she stopped leaving. Miriam laughed one evening. "I think we've accidentally adopted another child." Willow grinned. "I don't mind." Neither did Lena. She never understood why caring for the little girl felt so natural. Only that every time Willow smiled, something deep inside her heart felt strangely complete, far beyond the eastern wilderness. Another winter arrived, and as it had every year since the frozen river claimed the unknown healer, Alpha King Cassian Draven stood beside the icy water once more. Still searching, still hoping, still carrying the broken piece of rope that reminded him every day that somewhere beneath the snow, he had left behind the bravest woman he had ever known. 7 winters came and went. 7 times the river Varon froze beneath snow and silence. 7 times Alpha King Cassian Draven returned to the same stretch of broken river. The soldiers no longer questioned why. The villagers no longer whispered. Everyone understood. Their king was keeping a promise. He always carried the same weathered piece of rope. Its fibers had long since faded. The knot Aurelia had tied around her waist remained untouched. No jeweler had ever crafted anything more precious. The first winter after her disappearance, Cassian ordered engineers to inspect every dangerous river crossing in the kingdom. "What do you need, Your Majesty?" Captain Rowan asked. Cassian looked toward the rushing water. "I need no one else to stand where she stood." Within weeks, construction began. Wooden bridges replaced narrow ice crossings. Warning markers lined the riverbanks. Emergency shelters appeared every few miles, stocked with blankets, dry firewood, and medical supplies. Some nobles complained about the expense. The treasury cannot support projects for every remote village. Cassian answered without raising his voice. The treasury exists to protect the people. If crossing a river costs innocent lives, then the kingdom has failed them. No one argued again. The second winter, he founded the River Guard. Unlike ordinary soldiers, its members were trained for one purpose alone: saving lives. They learned swift water rescue, ice recovery, emergency medicine, avalanche response. Every recruit received a thick rescue rope before receiving a weapon. Captain Rowan smiled during the first graduation ceremony. "This is unusual." Cassian shook his head. "No, it should have existed long ago." By the 3rd year, every rescue rope distributed across the kingdom carried a small silver tag. 4 simple words were engraved upon each one. Because one was enough. A young recruit turned the tag over in his hands. "What does it mean?" Cassian held the old broken rope quietly. "It means, one act of courage can teach an entire kingdom." The young man nodded solemnly. He never asked another question. The River Guard soon became famous throughout neighboring lands. Not because of battles won, but because of lives saved. Children trapped during floods. Merchants stranded by blizzards. Hunters who fell through frozen lakes. Each rescue reminded Cassian why the organization existed. After every successful mission, he silently thanked the woman whose name he still did not know. The palace itself changed. Royal hunting expeditions were abolished. Instead, the forests became protected wildlife reserves. "Why?" a foreign ambassador once asked. Cassian smiled faintly. "Because I owe my life to a wolf." The ambassador laughed politely, believing it a metaphor. Only Captain Rowan knew the literal truth. Every year, on the anniversary of the frozen river, Cassian rode alone to the place where Aurelia had vanished. He repaired weathered fence posts, replaced worn rescue equipment. Sometimes he left fresh wildflowers upon the riverbank. Other times, he simply stood in silence. One harsh winter morning, an elderly villager approached him. "Your Majesty, you've searched for 7 years." Cassian nodded. The old man hesitated. "Do you truly believe she's still alive?" Cassian looked across the frozen water. He remembered golden gray eyes, a calm smile, one whispered word: "Live." "I don't know," he answered honestly. "But hope asks very little. It only asks that I don't stop looking." Far beyond the eastern mountains. Spring arrived early. At the woodland clinic, Willow chased butterflies, while Lena hung freshly washed bandages beneath the sun. Life was peaceful, simple, exactly as she had learned to love it. Then, the mountain shook. A distant roar rolled through the valley. Birds exploded from the treetops. The ground trembled beneath their feet. Willow looked toward the white peaks in alarm. "Lena, what was that?" Lena's smile disappeared. She knew that sound, even if she couldn't remember why. "An avalanche," she whispered. Within hours, messengers spread the news across the eastern forests. Entire mountain villages had been buried beneath snow. The river guard was already on its way, and leading the rescue mission was the Alpha King whose heart had never stopped searching for the healer, carried away by the frozen river 7 years before. The avalanche buried 3 villages before sunrise. Roofs disappeared beneath walls of snow. Entire families were trapped inside collapsed homes. Mountain roads vanished. The eastern wilderness became a maze of fallen trees and shattered stone. Before noon, the first river guard teams arrived. They worked with practiced precision. Some searched for survivors. Others treated the injured. Rescue dogs sniffed through the snow while physicians established temporary clinics. At the center of it all rode Alpha King Cassian Draven. He no longer wore the jeweled cloak of a ruler, only the heavy blue uniform of the river guard. A rescue rope rested across one shoulder. The old broken rope, the one Aurelia had used 7 years earlier, remained safely tucked inside a leather pouch over his heart. Only 2 miles away, Lena had already transformed her woodland clinic into an emergency hospital. Every bed was occupied. Blankets covered the floor. Children huddled beside the fireplace, while volunteers boiled water and prepared medicines. Willow hurried from patient to patient, carrying clean bandages. "Lena, the little boy in the corner has another fever. I'm coming, and Mrs. Hawthorne says she's dizzy. I'll see her next." Though chaos surrounded her, Lena never raised her voice, never panicked. She simply moved from one patient to another with calm determination. The volunteers trusted her completely. By late afternoon, another rescue team arrived outside the clinic. Willow ran to the doorway, carrying fresh firewood. Then she froze. Standing beside the horses was the largest black wolf she had ever seen. Its thick fur glistened with melting snow. Its golden eyes calmly surveyed the crowded yard. The wolf wasn't threatening anyone. It simply watched. Willow gasped. "Mother," she pointed excitedly. "It's the big black wolf." Lena looked up from the injured child she had been treating. "What wolf?" "The one from my dreams." Before anyone could stop her, Willow hurried toward the animal. Captain Rowan instinctively reached for her. "Careful!" But Cassian gently stopped him. The great wolf lowered its head. Willow smiled. "I knew you'd come." She scratched gently behind one enormous ear. The wolf closed its eyes contentedly. Captain Rowan stared in disbelief. "I've never seen him allow that." Lena finally stepped outside. She wiped her hands on her apron. The moment her eyes met the wolf's, something inside her shifted. A strange ache spread through her chest. Not fear, recognition. She couldn't explain it. The wolf stared back without moving. Its breathing became unsteady. 1,000 forgotten memories seemed trapped behind its eyes. Then, silver light surrounded the great black wolf. Willow blinked in amazement. The animal disappeared. In its place stood a man. Tall, dark-haired. His blue rescue uniform was dusted with snow. A faded leather pouch rested against his chest. Lena couldn't breathe. She had never seen him before. Yet somehow, her heart already knew him. Cassian couldn't move. For 7 years, he had imagined this moment in 1,000 different ways. He had pictured finding a grave, a forgotten village, perhaps even an old woman who remembered the healer's name. Never had he imagined finding her alive. Standing only a few steps away, she looked older, more confident. Her hair was longer. A faint scar crossed one side of her forehead, but her eyes, They were exactly the same. The eyes that had looked at him through a snowstorm before choosing his life over her own. "Lena," Willow asked softly, "are you all right?" Lena didn't answer. She couldn't, because tears had begun gathering without warning. She didn't know why. The stranger's face felt painfully familiar, as though she had loved someone she could no longer remember. Cassian finally whispered the only word his heart had carried for 7 years. "Aurelia." She frowned gently. "I'm sorry. I think you've mistaken me for someone else." His heart cracked. Not because she had forgotten him, because he realized the river had stolen even the memory of the woman she had once been. Yet despite the years, despite the silence, despite the forgotten past, something in both their hearts had already begun remembering, long before either mind understood why. For several long moments, no one spoke. Snow drifted quietly through the clinic courtyard. Rescue workers moved around them, carrying stretchers and supplies. Life continued, yet for Cassian, time had stopped. Lena looked at the stranger standing before her. There was sorrow in his eyes. Not the sorrow of someone meeting a stranger, the sorrow of someone who had already mourned her once. "I'm sorry," she repeated softly. "My name isn't Aurelia." "It's Lena." Cassian smiled sadly. "I know. You don't remember." She lowered her eyes. "I lost my memories years ago. The river." She touched the faint scar near her temple. "That's all they told me." His breath caught. The river. The word alone was enough to send old pain flooding back. Captain Rowan stepped forward quietly. "Your Majesty?" Cassian raised one hand. "Not yet." This wasn't a reunion to be rushed. He slowly reached beneath his rescue coat. From the leather pouch over his heart, he removed something wrapped in soft linen. He unfolded it carefully. Inside rested a small silver tag attached to several weathered strands of rope. The fibers were faded, frayed by water and time. Lena stared at it without understanding. "What is it?" Cassian's fingers trembled. "The last thing you gave me." She frowned. "I've never seen it." "I know." He held it out. "The rope. You tied one end around your waist. You threw the other to a wolf trapped beneath the ice. I was that wolf." Silence. Lena looked at him, then back at the old rope. Something stirred. Not a memory. A feeling. A heartbeat that suddenly seemed to echo inside her chest. Her fingertips brushed the frayed fibers. The moment she touched them, the world disappeared. Ice, snow, wind, screaming across a frozen river. A frightened black wolf crashing through breaking ice. Villagers shouting, "Leave it! It's only a wolf!" Her own voice. "Hold on!" The rope pulling tight. The ice breaking beneath her feet. Freezing water. Darkness. Then, olden wolf eyes, filled with fear, filled with gratitude. She gasped. The memories crashed over her like the river itself. She staggered backward. Cassian caught her before she fell. She looked up into his face. This time, she truly saw him. Not the king, the wolf, the life she had chosen to save. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "So," her voice trembled, "you lived." Cassian laughed through tears. "Because you didn't choose yourself." She gently shook her head. "No." She placed one hand over the old rope. "I chose life. You just happened to be the one holding the other end." His composure finally broke. For 7 years, he had imagined what he would say if he ever found her. Every speech disappeared. Every prepared apology vanished. He simply embraced her, carefully, as though she might disappear again if he held her too tightly. "I'm sorry," his voice cracked. "You lost everything because of me." She rested her forehead against his shoulder. "I lost my memories." She smiled faintly. "But perhaps they were only waiting until I was ready to carry them again." Nearby, Willow watched with wide, curious eyes. She tugged gently on Miriam's sleeve. "Why are they crying?" The elderly woman smiled through her own tears. Because sometimes, finding your way home takes longer than anyone expects. As evening settled over the valley, Cassian walked beside Lena to the frozen river overlooking the clinic. The water flowed peacefully beneath the last patches of winter ice. He reached into his pocket once more. This stayed with me every day. He handed her the silver tag. She read the tiny inscription engraved upon it. Because one was enough. She looked at him in confusion. What does it mean? Cassian smiled. It means one rope, one act of courage, one healer. They were enough to change an entire kingdom. Lena's eyes filled once again. She had believed she had lost 7 years. Instead, she had unknowingly spent them creating a second miracle, while she healed strangers in the eastern forests. The man she saved had spent every day making sure no one else would ever have to make the sacrifice she once did. 6 months later, the first snowfall returned to the northern mountains. This time, no traveler feared crossing the river Varon, where jagged ice had once claimed lives. A magnificent stone bridge now stretched from one bank to the other. At each end stood a river guard station. Bright lanterns burned through every winter night. Emergency sleds waited beside rescue boats. Medical supplies filled warm shelters for stranded travelers. No one crossing the river would ever again be alone. People from every province gathered for the official opening. Farmers, hunters, village healers, royal guards. Children bundled in thick coats chased one another through the snow, laughing as bells echoed across the valley. Many of them had no idea why this particular bridge mattered so much to their king. Cassian knew. So did Aurelia. She stood quietly beside him, wrapped in a simple white winter cloak. The memories had returned completely over the past several months. Along with them came the name she had once lost. She was Aurelia again, yet she never abandoned the name Lena. "It reminds me," she often said with a smile, "that even when I forgot who I was, kindness remembered." Beside her stood Willow, now proudly wearing the blue cloak of the youngest river guard trainee. She beamed as she looked across the bridge. "I still think this is the most beautiful place in the kingdom." Aurelia smiled. "It wasn't always. I know." Willow nodded. But it became one. Captain Rowan stepped onto the platform. "Your Majesty, the kingdom is ready." Cassian nodded. Instead of walking to the royal podium first, he reached into a polished wooden case. Inside lay the old rescue rope. Its frayed ends had been carefully preserved. The broken fibers remained visible. No one had tried to hide them. Instead, a master rope maker had braided the 2 broken ends together into a perfect circle, a reminder that even what had once been broken could become whole again. Cassian lifted it gently. The crowd fell silent. He looked across the gathered faces, then toward Aurelia. "When I was a young king, I believed strength meant surviving alone." He smiled faintly. "I was wrong." He held up the rope. "This is worth more than every crown I own." The crowd exchanged puzzled glances. Cassian continued. 7 years ago, a healer carrying medicine across this river found a dying wolf trapped beneath the ice. She had one rescue rope, only one. She could have saved herself. Instead, she chose to save a stranger. He paused. His voice softened. "I was that stranger." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Many had heard the legend. Few had realized the wolf had been their king. Cassian turned toward Aurelia. "The strongest person I have ever known wasn't a warrior. She wasn't a queen. She wasn't even trying to become a hero. She was simply a healer who believed another life mattered as much as her own." Aurelia's eyes shimmered with tears. Cassian slowly walked toward her. Then, before thousands of people, the Alpha King lowered himself onto one knee. Not because tradition demanded it, because gratitude did. He held out the braided rope circle. "I can never repay the life you gave me." He smiled. "But if you'll allow me, I'd like to spend the rest of mine protecting yours." The valley became completely still. Aurelia laughed softly, through happy tears. She took the rope from his hands, then gently separated the braided circle. Hidden inside was a beautifully crafted bracelet woven from the restored rope, strengthened with silver threads so it would never break again. She slipped it onto her wrist, then reached into her cloak. "I made something for you too." She tied an identical braided bracelet around Cassian's wrist. This time, she intertwined her fingers with his. "We both hold the rope." The first snowflakes of winter drifted gently across the bridge. Somewhere in the surrounding forests, wolves lifted their voices toward the sky. Not in mourning, not in loneliness, but in celebration. Because the rope that had once separated two lives had become the bond that united a king, a queen, and an entire kingdom. 5 years later, the River Guard had become more than a rescue organization. It had become the heart of the kingdom. Every child learned how to throw a rescue rope before learning how to wield a sword. Every village held winter safety drills before the first snowfall. Every bridge carried emergency lanterns that burned through the longest nights. Visitors from distant kingdoms often ask the same question: "Why does your nation spend so much treasure on people who may never need rescuing?" King Cassian always smiled before answering. Because one day, someone chose to spend everything she had on a stranger. We're simply honoring that gift. Queen Aurelia never allowed herself to be treated like a legend. Every week, she still traveled to remote villages with saddlebags full of herbs and medicine. The only difference was that she was no longer alone. Young healers accompanied her, eager to learn from the woman who had transformed compassion into a kingdom's greatest strength. One snowy afternoon, a nervous apprentice asked, "Your Majesty, were you frightened that day on the river?" Aurelia smiled as she crushed dried herbs with a stone mortar. Terrified, the young woman blinked. "But everyone says you were fearless." Aurelia gently shook her head. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's deciding someone else's life matters even while you're afraid. The apprentice quietly wrote those words into her notebook. Years later, they would be engraved inside every River Guard training academy. Willow had grown into a remarkable young woman. At 16, she became the youngest rescue captain in the kingdom's history. She could cross dangerous rivers faster than most seasoned guards. She knew every mountain trail, every hidden stream, every village that might need help before a storm. One evening, Cassian found her repairing rescue ropes inside the central station. "You tie the knots exactly like Aurelia." Willow smiled proudly. "She taught me." He picked up one finished rope. The knots were flawless. So did the river. She looked up. "What do you mean?" Cassian smiled thoughtfully. "Some teachers never speak, but they still change everything." The kingdom itself had changed beyond recognition. Winter deaths fell to nearly zero. Merchants traveled safely through mountain passes. Families no longer feared crossing frozen rivers. Neighboring rulers came to study the River Guard. Many returned home to build similar organizations. What began with one healer's sacrifice spread across the continent. Not through conquest, through example. Every year, on the anniversary of the frozen river, Cassian and Aurelia walked together to the place where they first met. The broken ice was long gone. Children now skated across a protected section of the river, under the careful watch of River Guard instructors. Laughter echoed where screams had once filled the air. Aurelia leaned against the bridge railing. "I used to think the river took 7 years from us." Cassian slipped his hand into hers. And now, she watched Willow teaching a little boy how to throw a rescue line. "I think it gave us the chance to save thousands of years for other families." He smiled. "I've thought the same thing." They stood quietly together. The cold wind carried the scent of pine through the valley. Aurelia looked down at the braided rope bracelet still wrapped around her wrist. The fibers had faded with time, but they remained strong, just like the promise they represented. Nearby, A father lifted his young daughter onto the bridge railing so she could watch a rescue demonstration. The little girl pointed excitedly toward the old weathered rope displayed inside the nearby glass case. "Daddy, why do they keep that old rope?" Her father smiled. "Because kingdoms aren't remembered for the crowns their kings wore. They're remembered for the people who taught those kings how to lead." Aurelia quietly looked away before anyone noticed the tears in her eyes. She had never imagined that one impossible choice, made in the space of a single heartbeat, would become the bridge connecting countless strangers to safer tomorrows. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness creates the longest legacy. 40 years later, children no longer crossed the River Varon with fear. They crossed it laughing. Some hurried to school. Some followed their parents to market. Others stopped halfway across the Great Stone Bridge simply to watch the river guard practice winter rescues below. To them, the rescue stations had always existed. The lanterns had always burned through the snowstorms. The bridges had always been there. Few remembered a time when winter claimed lives every year. History remembered, and so did the old king and queen. Cassian's hair had turned silver. The scar from the assassin's arrow still marked his shoulder. He no longer led rescue missions himself. Instead, he watched from the riverbank with quiet pride. Beside him stood Aurelia. Her hands remained rough from decades of tending the sick. She had never stopped being a healer. Even after becoming queen, even after history celebrated her courage, every week, she still visited patients in the mountain villages. People often joked that the royal carriage carried more medicine than jewels. She always laughed. "They're worth more." Willow now commanded the entire river guard. The frightened orphan who had once carried an injured fox to Aurelia's clinic had become the kingdom's finest rescue leader. On this winter morning, she stood before hundreds of new recruits. Each held a freshly braided rescue rope. Willow lifted hers. "What is the first rule of the river guard?" The recruits answered together. "No life is too small to save." And the second? "We never risk one life carelessly, when preparation can save them both." She smiled. "Good. Remember that. Courage without wisdom becomes another tragedy." Aurelia watched proudly. Years ago, she had possessed only one rope. Now, every rescue station stored hundreds. No healer, no traveler, no child would ever again face the impossible choice she once had. After the ceremony ended, a little boy wandered toward the glass case, standing at the center of the bridge. Inside rested an old, weathered rope. Its fibers had faded almost white with age. Its broken ends remained carefully braided together. The boy frowned. "Grandmother, why don't they replace it with a new one?" His grandmother smiled. "Because that old rope reminds us of something new." He looked puzzled. "What?" She pointed toward the rescue boats waiting below. "The bridges, the stations, the people who know how to save strangers. They all began with that rope." The boy studied it more carefully. "So, one rope changed the kingdom?" A familiar voice answered behind him. "Not the rope." The boy turned. He didn't recognize the elderly woman speaking. To him, she looked like any kind grandmother. Aurelia smiled gently. "The person willing to throw it did." The boy thought quietly before nodding. "I think that's even better." She laughed softly. "So do I." As sunset painted the river gold, Cassian and Aurelia stood together at the center of the bridge. The water flowed peacefully beneath them. Nothing remained of the broken ice that had once separated life from death. Cassian looked at the mountains. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had listened to the villagers?" Aurelia smiled. "I probably would have delivered my medicine and gone home." He nodded. "And I would have died beneath the ice." She reached for his hand. "I wasn't thinking about kingdoms. I wasn't thinking about destiny. I simply saw someone who needed help." Cassian intertwined his fingers with hers. "And because of that, an entire kingdom learned what real leadership looks like. Above the entrance to the first river guard station, the inscription remained untouched despite the passing decades. A single act of courage can rescue more than one life. Sometimes, it rescues an entire kingdom. Travelers paused to read those words before continuing across the bridge. Most smiled. Some never gave them another thought. But every rescue worker understood exactly what they meant. Because long ago, a young healer, carrying the only rescue rope she owned, chose a stranger's life before her own. The frozen river tried to claim her. Instead, it carried her toward a future where compassion became stronger than fear. Service became greater than power. And one ordinary act of courage became the foundation of an extraordinary kingdom.